Good afternoon, Mr. Tata. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really a pleasure for you to address all the entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, and we really appreciate your sharing the time with us.
Thank you.
Uh,
As always, it's a pleasure to be with you at times like this.
Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Tata needs no introduction. We've had the pleasure, of course, and privilege of having Mr. Tata on our global advisory board, where immense learning, immense guidance has happened over the last 4 years. And I'd like to thank you again, Mr. Tata, for that. As you're aware, this is a very different time from perhaps what anybody or yourself have seen in the earlier days. And I'd like to start off by perhaps an interesting anecdote. You're finding yourself at home right now, and this must be very, very new overall in the last few weeks. How's been your experience working from home?
It's a different experience. On the one hand, the danger is that your productivity is sort of reduced because everybody's dispersed. Particularly for me, there's been very little video conferencing or video meetings, so there's a learning experience which many of you already have because of the business. That has been the way you're living with your Mac Pro out of your briefcase. Your office is where you are. And that has not been the case with me. And I've been perhaps more old-fashioned. I need to have paper to feel comfortable with a note or to immerse myself in a note rather than look at a screen. But that learning comes pretty fast because we're doing the same thing, and after a few minutes you forget that you're looking at a face on a screen and you're looking at something in real time. The catch is that the times are different. And not only are we looking at a different landscape, but we are looking at ourselves in a landscape that we've never seen before. None of us have been able to compare this with any calamity that we've had before. We've always been able to relate ourselves to a geographic area where we can escape the particular circumstance. This is the first time in my experience that we have a situation where there is no place to go, there's no place to sit free of this area, there's no place to consider an escape. Everywhere we go, everywhere we look, whatever decision we take has an impact not only on one part of the world, but everybody. So it's a totally different experience, and one which is difficult to relate to in terms of what should we do, where should we go. It seems like there's an undercurrent of getting rid of the uh, the problem, the virus, before we can say what the new normal is going to be. We don't know when that's going to take place, whether it is going to take place in the first place, or it'll be stretched out to next year, if then. So there's a bit of tentativeness in this, and I seek your indulgence in in talking to you on this, because I think it's wrong to say that this will happen by this period of time. We hope it will,
Sure, sure.
but it may not. And if it may not, maybe the route to go is another route. And with due respect, you and I and others sitting at home uh, are not seeing the darkest part of the scenario that we're talking about. We're not seeing the hunger. We're not seeing the despair. We're not seeing the separation of families. We're not seeing uh, keeping distance, which is not difficult for us, but around us, we have abject poverty. We have great concentration of people in close proximity. And then we're asking, what will the world look like? And so repeatedly, I think we'll, in this conversation, have an issue, certainly from my side, of saying, I don't know.
No, no, absolutely. And you're absolutely right that, some of us are obviously privileged, and there is a lot of hardship at the workers, the migration laborers, and a lot of people who need to even earn a daily living. Absolutely, I agree with you. Um, Coming back to entrepreneurs, um, in this pandemic, the scenario which seems to be multidimensional. All the other earlier ones, which at least I've seen, are financial in nature, and this one is finance, this one is health, this one is travel, this one is, everything you can think of, including the fact that countries are sort of locking down. Entrepreneurs are bucking up. They're cutting costs, um, and trying to obviously survive. In many cases, extend the runway. Any view on, obviously there's a lot of hardship in terms of making sure companies keep afloat, but do you see this also as an opportunity uh, for entrepreneurs, and especially in the technology field, as we move forward on a daily basis, trying to combat what is around us?
I think that's a very worthwhile statement to stay with for a while, because the people we're dealing with as the young entrepreneurs are people who have found solutions of another way to deal with a problem when it occurs. It's that innovativeness that has enabled some of the young entrepreneurs to um, operate in fields that seem to be sort of very mature, but they have found a means of finding a spot or a niche or a segment that they can operate in differently than the traditional way, and have done exciting things in that manner. So it would be fair to say that we are going to see the same kind of innovativeness created, and the same kind of situation like you have heard many times over, that he was looking at a wall, you found a door in that wall and went through, or a window. How you look at opportunities and how you package them are different. And this situation does give us an opportunity to innovate, but it tests us, and it it involves going through the transformation of looking at a different way to do things, caused by shortages in this case, or caused by uh, strictures or legislation on the other side, new partnerships. Um, Everything's up for grabs, if you might. So there is an opportunity. I'm sure some of the entrepreneurs are looking at those opportunities, and it would be exciting if we were to find some of these to talk about this afternoon when we are interacting.
No, absolutely. And happy to share some examples we found. We are also finding that entrepreneurs have this very exciting attitude that we will overcome. That's at a mindset level. You're familiar with CureFit, yourself an investor. They've started live classes at home, live consultations at home, one-to-one trainings, all digital in nature. And that's actually growing very well. And we see that in companies. Again, we are familiar with obviously some of our portfolio companies. So, Chirate has found this in Healthify Me, where live classes are going on at home. Doctor consultations have started at home by many companies in the country overall. We have a very interesting company called Ratan, which is enabling through artificial intelligence and satellite visualization quality of crops. And that kind of company is actually improving their sales. And a company like Unifor, which is BPO sector, where travel is under stress, but BPO calls are rising. So technology enabling digitization of call centers is becoming a big draw right now. So I can take many examples here overall. And the reason I'm taking these examples is a question which says, do you think technology in the current scenario will actually play a major part in looking at these opportunities and solving the challenges which now India and entrepreneurs are facing or businesses facing?
I think the quick answer that I find is yes. We can find answers in how to operate in a new scenario. Our willingness to do that, or our interest in finding those new solutions are the key. So I guess one way to look at this is not to look at the changes that we are faced with, but to look at this as a new landscape, a new playing field, and applying our adaptive and innovativeness to finding solutions, and hopefully looking back and saying, this problem or this challenge gave us a new way to do things. As you mentioned, digitizing at home, new way to bring your customer sort of into your fold, to deal with things as they would be in normal circumstances, but the circumstances are new. And uh, I can say that looking at the situation as it stands, uh, I'm sure there are going to be situations where we're going to say, why did we not do this earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. So in some sense, you're also saying this is the time where entrepreneurs could look at new business models, new products, new services, new revenue models, which perhaps were not being looked at earlier.
Yeah.
And what's the mindset of the entrepreneur which you think you would advise him to be in today? Because there's obviously a lot of hardship and then cash considerations. So with what mindset does the entrepreneur go into the market today?
I think that there could be multiple views on this. One could do it because the entrepreneur is enterprising, unwilling to sit and moan about the, the change situation and the need to undo what he has done. That's one type. The other type is where it's not looked at as a problem. It's looked at as you said, as an opportunity, and the excitement of finding a new way to do things. I know when I was a younger person in the organization, one of the most exciting times that I have had is where you can sit down with a bunch of your colleagues and brainstorm.
Mm-hmm.
And what did that brainstorm do? It enabled you to look for a different way to do things to beat your competition, or to reduce your costs, or to change the way in which you operated. And you can't do this as easily in a smokestack industry, but in the enterprises that we're talking to at the present moment, this could be an invigorator, if you might. I would like to say that this is where those bright uh, answers come, where nobody says that's a stupid thought.
Thought. Okay.
Everything has a value, and so the most innovative people are those that who say, let's get a clean sheet of paper and look at another way to do things. And if we're seeing that happen, it could bring about a new wave. It stops us from being traditional. It forces us to be innovative. And that would be the biggest opportunity we have. The next is, can we be innovative first? Can we do it better than our peers in other parts of the world? That would come later, but just what you said, digitizing healthcare and moving it to the home, doctor's intervention, digitize at the home, because you can see, you can talk, you can feel, you can the only thing you can't do is tactilely examine something in your hand.
No,
But we're already traversed away from the tradition, as we've spoken in the last few minutes.
yeah. And Mr. Tata, this is about businesses. This is about entrepreneurs. Do you think entrepreneurs will come with live consulting at home, very phenomenal apps, easy to use. And what's your view on consumer behavior? Do you think this scenario which we are in as an economy is also forcing changes in consumer behavior?
Yeah, I think consumer behavior is a little based on little different uh, metrics. It's a willingness to be exposed to the excitement of doing things a different way. It it deals exactly with the innovativeness of the entrepreneur in making this the packaging that he is offering to the customer. If it excites the customer, if it's packaged nicely, well thought through,
Hmm.
I think the consumer will welcome it. He will not resist it. And I think the transformation we saw from the offline to the online
Online, yeah.
uh, has been an indication of a large consumer base willing to look at a new way to buy, a new way to sell, a new way to a new experience in terms of dealing with uh, mercantile issues. And I think we're looking at that likely to happen or continue to happen in the future.
No, well said. And again, I think the other sort of follow-up query which I had was, people used to travel to go to a doctor or to go to a gym or buy grocery, and or even in a B2B business. Now, if live elements come in, digital elements come in, uh, the whole issue of payment, would they be willing to pay more, or would they be willing to pay the same, or would they be willing to pay less? Any thoughts on that?
I think there's an element of the marketplace that would be willing to pay more because more is being done to the product and to the customer. And he looks at that as a convenience to him. He's willing to pay for that. And there's another segment of the customer is, who is doing this because he expects to see it being more economic for him.
Hmm.
And you put those two things together, and the consumer has defined what in his mind is an acceptable cost. The entrepreneur has put more into that package than the customer had earlier been able to access. And there's a happy marriage there. It's only a new entrepreneur who comes in and perhaps tries to dislodge the the initial player in the field.
The field. Okay. And again, we are talking about entrepreneurs, we are talking about young entrepreneurs using technology. If I may just take a step back, and the industry, as you call it, the smokestack industry, uh, how does the smokestack industry deal with this? Is it very different? Is it same? Is it innovation, or is it waiting for this to recover?
That's that's a difficult question to answer because let's, in the fear of talking specifics, let's take the steel industry.
Okay.
Um, the the inputs to make steel available to the customer cheaper or faster are there and have been in use. But there's no clean sheet of paper as another way to make steel.
Right.
And I think there hasn't been a major um, productive input after continuous casting, for example, where you cut out 2 or 3 processes. So it's different in terms of the product you produce, how you're able to sell it, how you're able to deliver it. All of that is much more imaginative with the young entrepreneur that we're talking of, with the new manufacturing systems. The whole supply chain is changed. I think in many ways, the smokestack industry finds it difficult to change all the entire supply chain. Can improve on it, but it's by and large tweaking it compared to what's happening in the digital area.
However, innovations may be possible in the supply chain, in cutting out inefficiencies in distribution chains, where possibly technology can help.
Yes. In that business area, it could be just as innovative and just as far-reaching in its area, and it would contribute to a smokestack industry and have its effect in that sense. You know, for example, you look at the automobile industry, and you look at the changes that are being envisaged today: autonomous driving, artificial intelligence being merged in terms of application. The industry was there. You had automobiles. What you're seeing today is a new world application for them of shared mobility. It's something that you would be laughed down 15 years ago, 10 years ago. And yet it's happening in a smokestack industry, being driven. It's, for example, quite conceivable that a leading car manufacturer would be a Tesla rather than a Ford or a GM or a Mercedes. And they brought a lot of innovation into the business. And so tomorrow, the largest car maker could be an Apple, because it brings to the table a new approach to doing something. So I think what's happening is the barriers are coming down.
Yeah.
And the one way to look at it is that's being driven by the hardship that we are all facing in the marketplace, caused by a completely different phenomenon, namely a virus that's overtaken the world.
Absolutely. And I was reading somewhere that if you take all the viruses in the world together, and this is serious, the total weight of that virus is just 1 gram, which is changing the world right now overall.
Yeah.
Interesting observation. So fundamentally, even the smokestack industry is being affected by innovation. After all, Tesla is an entrepreneur who brought it up, and others, whether it's alternative modes of transportation or shared mobility, innovation takes place outside the large corporation in a big way.
Yeah.
Mr. Tata, coming back to, again, the entrepreneur who's building, we saw entrepreneurs going to, many, many crores worth of revenues. And then when the lockdown happened, going down to zero because there was a physical interface. And then, of course, some of them are coming back as the lockdown hopefully starts moving opening up, and in some cases, digital revenue start ramping up. We are seeing that on the ground. However, the entrepreneur still has to do this choice of business priorities versus the human side of things, as you mentioned it earlier. So, any thoughts on how to balance this? Because there is cost efficiency required, there is a business requirement, but you can't afford too long because the cash runway may be small. How do you balance the business part with the human things?
I I'd like to say that's something I can't answer generally because I think you have to be looking at individual businesses and the leading entrepreneurs that are driving those businesses. In many cases, the innovation or the change is driven by uh, the innovativeness of the entrepreneur rather than the change is sitting to be undertaken.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of things you have mentioned in your statements the last few minutes correctly indicate that the opportunity is there. Somebody has to see the opportunity, package it in a manner that makes sense, debug it, and push it forward. So whether you look at music done by Apple, or whether you look at an electric car from a non-car manufacturer, you look at power grid distribution, decentralized power, as Tesla is doing to the home, and you look at delivery of medicines and doctor examinations, a synthetic general practitioner, if you might. You look at the input of data from the patient to the doctor
Doctor, yeah.
on your wrist or on some decoder somewhere on your body. You look at remote medicine and surgery. It's there. Today, it's surgery through manipulators, but tomorrow it could be sitting in San Francisco and doing surgery in Bombay. So it's how far can you stretch the envelope? And I think what you're looking at and what you're experiencing is there's no limit to that envelope, which a few years ago we kept saying we stretched it to its limits.
Right.
That doesn't hold true today.
And that's precisely the opportunity.
And that's the opportunity, but a hard thing to say is that the virus today has an issue of generating those questions and forcing them on us. Otherwise, we would go along until there was a more enterprising entrepreneur who thought it. I think we have to look at this as an opportunity to do something that is more innovative than we would have done in 2020. Yeah.
Well, in some sense, India did that. 1991, the economy back to the wall in India opened up as such.
Yeah.
And so in some sense, this is a massive opportunity for literally, I think you have said, what you're giving the message to all of us is clean slate, see if you can redraw things, because those will be much more innovative, because the new way of working is very different from what it used to be just a few months back.
Yeah.
So any specific message you would like to give to entrepreneurs who are out there? They're still dreaming of obviously building companies overall. But before that, the message to entrepreneurs, investors, what do you think investors should be doing at this point of time?
I think the normal first reaction is investors should be keeping their powder dry.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that might seem to be very prudent. It may also be uh, very self-defeating. Uh, that now might be the time when investors should be looking at opportunities like they did in the 70s and 80s, where it was driven by the creation of the integrated circuit, or it was created by moving to a digital world, or looking at uh, nanotechnology as a means, or looking at biology or sub-nano driven products. Whatever it was, the 70s and 80s were those kinds of heady times when those things happen. So today, one could have a bunch of uh, investors who would say, I'll back this company because it's being driven to do something differently.
Yeah.
Rather than say, no, right now is not the time to look at something new. And I would like to say that, to me, the virus will disappear in a period of time, but the innovativeness that we bring during these difficult times would be something we could look back on and say, well, there was a good part of what we faced and the hardship that we went through had its up moments, which we availed of.
How true, absolutely. And do you think India as a country with entrepreneurship and the technology around entrepreneurs you see right now presents to investors globally and in India, in essence, possibly a bigger opportunity in the next few years?
I I think it's not limited to India. It's I say what I'm about to say. I say with some degree of concern. You compare the situation we're in to a world war,
Mm-hmm.
which was destructive. Cities got bombed. Um, Manufacturing industries were disabled, and yet it was in those times that uh, many new technologies were developed, many scientific, some of them dramatically horrible in terms of what were done to human beings, but science was taken to a new height.
Right.
Um, Out of it came rockets, came other forms of enterprise and forms of destruction. Both were an issue of application, but they were entrepreneurs who were supported by their governments to open new doors, if you might. That could be the case again.
Absolutely.
It's not a world war, but it's like a world war. There's a dramatic need for vaccines. There's a dramatic need for solutions. And strange things happen. I think we really have to look back and say, where did so-and-so innovativeness really have its roots? Quite often, it has its roots at a time of crisis.
Right.
And we have a crisis on our hands today. And so there's an initial throw your hands up, you have this crisis, and then there's our own innovativeness that comes to play. That's the time we need to support, to invest, to not dismiss something as being too far out, but being something we should look at.
Absolutely. And you mentioned governments, and any thoughts? Governments can play a major role. Countries are collaborating, corporations are collaborating more, entrepreneurs are collaborating. Any thoughts on how government can actually support this?
Yes. To take an example, if you look at the US and you look at what organizations like DARPA have done as government, supporting new technologies in biotechnology or in integrated circuits or in a total variety of things. The government has supported $3, $4, $5 billion, which the private sector would not have been able to do. They have ushered in new industries because of their ability to come up with the funds earmarked for a particular development. And if we had, at a time like this, had a way of marshaling some funds in certain areas, we could have another wave of innovativeness arising out of a problem, just like we've had in World War II,
Yeah.
or the Cold War. And look at the plus side of that, it caused innovation to take place, which would perhaps not have happened or taken much longer to do than they have done.
They have done. Yes, absolutely. And I think government is playing a role, and you're aware of the fact that government is supporting the venture capital industry through SIDBI, which is like a sovereign fund of funds in the market. But absolutely, if it's bigger and better, this is like R&D. Tech is like R&D, so it takes a little bit of time to come out, but more is always good. In some sense, technology entrepreneurs, do you think, can be GDP additive in this scenario? In a 3, 4, 5 year time frame?
Yes, it can, but I don't think. I think some things are being driven, like the vaccines, fighting for time to solve a problem. But
yes,
many of the other areas are one that needs patient capital. They need to be that clean sheet of paper that I keep referring to. That has to bring something to the table that you have a long-term vision on. And there have to be entities that support that kind of time phase that we will have to go through. And you look at, going back to the 70s, you look at some of the early biotech areas. They're supposed to change the world when they when they were set out. That was the prognosis that and the driver of what we did at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Much of that hasn't yet happened, but it probably will happen. And it wouldn't have even taken form had it not been for the long-term vision of the government, of the federal government in the US, science coming together. Well, one very important thing that I believe has taken place is R&D earlier was in silos.
Mm-hmm.
You had electrical engineering or mechanical engineering or biology, and they have come together. Biology has become life sciences. Electronics has been part of it. Um, Manufacturing techniques have started to use digital technology to make things better, to go from millimeters to microns. And today, successful R&D is multidisciplinary. And many things that we see today would not be there if they were in silos today.
Absolutely.
So maybe there's a new phase of what we have to look at, uh, which today are not silly, they make sense, but there's another page to be turned to deliver something that was not considered possible.
Absolutely. Mr. Tata, any final message? I think we've learned a lot from this. You're saying India is at the entrepreneurial world is innovating. There's collaboration. The technology has a role to play. What's the final message for the entrepreneur at this moment? What would you advise entrepreneurs who are still out there fighting this economy, fighting the hardships, but innovating, uh, and they would still want to build new companies?
New company or another way to do things in their company?
Both, both.
Oh, I don't think there's advice that can be driven. I think that the the motivator is within the entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Just in the few minutes we've been talking to each other, we have traversed from looking at collapse of the world around us, and in a few minutes we've been talking about the future that may force on us,
Right,
not as a disaster, not as a destruction, but as an opportunity.
right.
And it's not you or I that makes that happen. It's the drive in the entrepreneur's spirit that enables that to take place. Um, and so I would say that the message that one would give would really be to look at this as a moment of opportunity and use that as a means of seeing whether we can look at new areas in a new way, time frames that were never before considered possible,
Yeah,
and can we just have a new way to look at things that finally become uh, a way of life. What would we be today if we didn't have the web?
mm-hmm.
We didn't have internet. Um, if we look back and say, how did we manage without it? It'd be a good soul searching question to ask. So I think uh, my message to an entrepreneur would be use this as an opportunity to innovate more, not to be discouraged, but look at this as a real opportunity to uh, look at having a long-term vision, uh, blue sky and and daydream through the whole technology routine. There are going to be areas that you can uh, initiate, not the same ideas that you have in the past, but fresh ideas.
Ideas, yeah. Well, Mr. Tata, very motivating, very adept at this moment. Thank you so much for joining us on this call. As you rightly said, if the internet was not there, we would not be talking today
And
at this moment. And again, wish you safety and health. Um, and hopefully, we'll see you soon then.
okay, thank you, Sudhir, and pleasure being with you. And I hope this has been a moment of opportunity that we will all see, and we will stop looking at this as another bombing crisis that took place during World War II.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Tata.